Growing up, I was always told that blood is thicker than water, but what they never mentioned is that some blood relatives will drain you dry if given the chance. My name is Rebecca, I'm 34, and my older sister Vanessa tried to steal our family home from right under me, until a yellowed document hidden in our father's old desk turned her certain victory into her greatest humiliation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Anderson family home stood on Maple Avenue for 3 generations, a Victorian masterpiece with wraparound porches and gables that caught the morning light like something from a fairy tale. To the outside world, we were the picture of success, respected business owners, active community members, a legacy family in our small town of Westlake. But within those ornate walls, a different story unfolded, one where I learned early that my place in the family hierarchy was permanently fixed below my sisters. Vanessa was 5 years older, and from my earliest memories, she occupied the center of our parents' universe. My father, Richard Anderson, built his real estate business from nothing, and he saw in Vanessa the perfect heir, determined, shrewd, unflinching in negotiations. She mirrored his ambition with uncanny precision, while I gravitated toward my mother's more creative sensibilities. I studied literature and art history. Vanessa studied business and finance. I restored antique furniture in the garden shed. Vanessa attended networking events with father and charmed potential investors. "Rebecca, dear," my mother would say, gently redirecting my attention when I tried to show her my latest painting. "That's lovely. But could you keep it down? Your father and Vanessa are discussing the Stevens property deal." The Stevens property deal always seemed more important than whatever I was doing, as did the Wilson acquisition, the downtown redevelopment project, and countless other business matters that excluded me by unspoken agreement. Father's office was Vanessa's domain by extension, a space where I rarely ventured except when explicitly summoned. Dark mahogany shelves lined the walls, bearing leather-bound books on property law and investment strategies that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the interest I showed in them. The massive desk dominated the room, its surface perpetually organized according to Father's exacting standards, each document and paperweight positioned with mathematical precision. "Perhaps Rebecca could handle the company's social media," Vanessa suggested during one family dinner when I was 27, having just been laid off from the local museum where I'd worked as an educational coordinator. She didn't look up from her plate as she made this suggestion, as though my career options were an afterthought hardly worth her full attention. "That's administrative work," Father dismissed immediately. "We have interns for that sort of thing." "No, Rebecca's not. Cut out for Anderson real estate. She takes after your mother's side. Artistic, impractical. Better she finds something that suits her." Temperament. I sat silently, pushing steamed vegetables around my plate and pretending that his assessment didn't cut me to the core. My temperament had always been the explanation for why I wasn't offered the opportunities Vanessa received as birthright. Temperament, as though my personality was a deficiency rather than simply different from theirs. My mother reached over and patted my hand. "There's nothing wrong with being sensitive, dear. The world needs all types." Her attempt at comfort only emphasized the underlying message. My type wasn't the type that succeeded in the Anderson family business. Despite being designated the family outsider, I loved our home fiercely. While Vanessa and Father saw it primarily as an asset, prime real estate in a desirable historic district, I cherished its character, the way the third stair creaked despite numerous repairs, the stained glass window on the landing that cast rainbow patterns across the wall on sunny afternoons. I was the one who supervised the restoration of the original hardwood floors, who researched period-appropriate paint colors when the exterior needed refreshing, who cataloged the antique fixtures and furnishings that had been in our family for generations. "All that effort for aesthetics," Vanessa commented once, watching me carefully strip decades of paint from an original doorframe. The property value comes from the location and square footage, not whether the moldings are authentic to 1897. Perhaps that was the fundamental difference between us. Vanessa saw value in market terms, appraisals, comparable sales, potential return on investment. I saw value in preservation, in continuity, in the stories embedded in physical spaces. When our mother died unexpectedly of an aneurysm, the dynamics shifted. Father retreated into his work, spending longer hours at the office and less time at home. Vanessa stepped into the void, making decisions about household matters with the same efficiency she applied to business dealings. I was 32 then, living in a small apartment downtown after a brief, failed attempt at graduate school in Boston. I returned home frequently, ostensibly to check on father, but equally drawn by concern for the house itself, worried that without Mother's softer influence, its character would be sacrificed to pragmatism. My worries weren't unfounded. Within months, Vanessa had replaced the antique light fixtures in the dining room with modern chandeliers. The old wiring was a fire hazard, Rebecca. Converted Mother's sewing room into a home office. Father never goes in there anyway. And begun discussing the possibility of updating the kitchen with stainless steel appliances and granite countertops. It would significantly increase resale value. Resale value? I questioned, alarmed. Are you planning to sell the house? Eventually, all assets need to be liquidated, she replied with the dispassionate tone she used for business matters. Not immediately, of course, but when Father retires, downsizing would be sensible. I couldn't imagine our family home being sold to strangers. Couldn't bear the thought of unknown hands repainting the walls, replacing the garden beds Mother had so lovingly tended, perhaps even demolishing sections to create the open-concept layouts that were currently fashionable. But my objections were brushed aside as sentimental. That word again, like temperament, a subtle indictment of my character. 2 years after Mother's passing, Father suffered a severe stroke. The prognosis was uncertain. The doctors spoke of partial recovery, of physical therapy and speech pathologists, of patients measured in months and years rather than days. Vanessa immediately took charge, arranging for in-home care, consulting with specialists, and, most significantly, assuming power of attorney over Father's affairs. It's the logical choice, she explained when I questioned why I hadn't been consulted in this decision. I've been working alongside Father for years. I understand his business interests and can protect them while he's incapacitated. You've never shown any interest in the practical side of things, Rebecca. It was true in one sense. I had never shown interest in the business, but profoundly false in another. I had always cared deeply about our family's legacy, just not the financial aspects of it. I cared about the photographs and albums dating back to our great-grandparents, the handwritten recipes passed down through generations, the furniture that bore the invisible imprints of ancestors I'd never met, but whose blood ran in my veins. When Vanessa announced her intention to move back into the family home to better care for Father, I felt a surge of relief. Despite our differences, she was taking responsibility, showing the familial dedication I'd always believed she possessed, beneath her business-like exterior. I offered to move back as well, to share the caregiving duties. That won't be necessary, she said, not unkindly, but firmly. The nurse will be here during the day, and I'll handle evenings. Too many people would just confuse Father in his condition. You can visit during the established hours the doctor recommended. Established hours, as though I were a casual acquaintance rather than family. But I swallowed my hurt and focused on Father's recovery, bringing books to read aloud during my established hours, playing the classical music he had always enjoyed, sitting in companionable silence when speech became too frustrating for him. One evening, arriving a half-hour earlier than my designated time, I overheard Vanessa on the phone in Father's office, her voice carrying clearly through the partially open door. Yes, the paperwork is nearly finalized, she was saying. Once, The title transfer is complete. We can move forward with the rezoning application. The historical designation is an obstacle, but not insurmountable. No, my sister isn't involved. She has no idea, and frankly, no legal claim once the transfer is processed. Father's condition actually simplifies things considerably. I froze. In the hallway, my hand gripping the banister as I struggled to process what I was hearing. Title transfer? Rezoning? Historical designation? These terms could only refer to one thing: the family home. Vanessa wasn't merely moving in to care for father. She was orchestrating some kind of property transfer that would give her exclusive ownership, cutting me out entirely. The realization hit me with physical force, a blow to the solar plexus that left me breathless. My sister, whom I had always viewed as coolly pragmatic but fundamentally fair, was using father's incapacitation to secure the family home for herself, not to preserve it, but based on her mention of rezoning, to potentially redevelop it for commercial purposes. The historic family home that I loved might soon be transformed beyond recognition or demolished entirely, all without my knowledge or consent. In that moment, standing in the hallway of my childhood home with my hand pressed against my mouth to stifle any sound that might alert Vanessa to my presence, I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic movement of self-perception. I had spent my entire life accepting the narrative that my sister was the capable one, the responsible one, the one who understood how the world really worked while I drifted through on sentiment and impracticality. But if this was what capability looked like, this calculated betrayal of family trust, then perhaps my supposed weaknesses were actually strengths of a different kind. For the first time, I didn't retreat. I didn't convince myself I had misunderstood or that Vanessa must have good reasons for her actions. Instead, I silently descended the stairs, slipped out the front door, and began to formulate a plan. If Vanessa had learned strategy from our father, then perhaps it was time I put those same genetic tendencies to use, not for profit or advantage, but to protect what rightfully belonged to our family, to both of us. The invisible daughter was about to become very visible indeed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. I had always viewed confrontation as something to be avoided, a disruptor of harmony rather than a necessary tool for justice. This aversion had served Vanessa well over the years, allowing her subtle power plays to go unchallenged, her gradual accumulation of familial authority to proceed unopposed. But the stakes had never been this high before. I parked haphazardly, my normally careful attention to alignment abandoned in my distracted state. Inside my modest two-bedroom apartment, filled with furniture I had lovingly restored, walls adorned with my own paintings and vintage photographs of our ancestors, I paced restlessly, considering my options. Direct confrontation seemed the obvious first step, but experience had taught me that Vanessa excelled at dismissing my concerns as emotional overreactions. "You always were sensitive, Rebecca," she would say with that particular smile. Not unkind but patronizing, as though my feelings were a charming but inconvenient childish trait she had outgrown. No, simply accusing her would only put her on guard without gaining me any advantage. Legal consultation emerged as the more prudent course, but this presented its own challenges. Westlake was a small town where professional relationships intertwined with personal ones. Most local attorneys had connections to Anderson Real Estate. Some had even handled transactions for my father. I needed someone uncompromised by existing loyalties, someone who would view my situation objectively. I retrieved my laptop and began researching attorneys in neighboring Clayton, the larger city 30 miles south. 3 hours and dozens of reviews later, I had compiled a short list of possibilities. I would need to take time off work, from The art gallery where I had finally found a position that valued my knowledge of historical artifacts and aesthetic sensibility. But this couldn't wait. The phrase, "Once the title transfer is complete," echoed in my memory, a ticking clock counting down to dispossession. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake reconstructing the fragments of Vanessa's phone conversation, analyzing each phrase for additional clues. The mention of rezoning particularly troubled me. Our home was in a designated historic district with strict preservation requirements I had always supported despite their limitations on modernization. If Vanessa was discussing rezoning, her plans were more ambitious than simply claiming sole ownership. She intended to fundamentally transform the property, perhaps into commercial space given her frequent complaints about the wasted potential of its prime location. Dawn found me exhausted but resolute. I called the gallery, explaining that a family emergency required my immediate attention, then scheduled an appointment with Patricia Winters, a real estate attorney in Clayton whose biography mentioned experience with historic properties and family estate disputes. Her earliest availability was the following afternoon, sooner than I had dared hope, but still an eternity given my growing sense of urgency. With time to fill before the consultation, I decided to gather whatever documentation I could access. The family home's original deed might be on file at the county recorder's office, and any recent changes would be documented there as well. Knowledge was leverage, and I had lived too long without either. The county administration building was a utilitarian structure that contrasted sharply with Westlake's carefully maintained historic aesthetic. Inside, fluorescent lighting and beige walls created an atmosphere of bureaucratic efficiency devoid of charm. I approached the recorder's counter with feigned confidence, acutely aware of my inexperience in such matters. "I'd like information on a property on Maple Avenue," I explained to the clerk, whose name tag identified her as Diane. "The Anderson family home at 412 Maple." Diane's fingers moved efficiently across her keyboard. "Are you the property owner?" "It's my family home," I answered carefully. "I'm Rebecca Anderson." She nodded without looking up. "I can provide publicly available information about the property." "One moment." The printer behind her hummed to life, producing several pages which she gathered and placed before me. "This shows the original deed from 1897, transfers of ownership through the generations, and any liens or encumbrances currently on record." I thanked her and moved to a small table in the corner to review the documents. The earliest deed bore my great-great-grandfather's name, the elegant script recording his purchase of the land where he would build our family home. Subsequent transfers showed the property passing from father to son until reaching my father, Richard Anderson, who had inherited it in 1985 upon my grandfather's death. What caught my attention, however, was a notation from 15 years ago, around the time my father's business had weathered a significant financial crisis. The document referenced a trust establishment, placing the property into the Anderson Family Trust. I had never heard of this trust, had no knowledge of its terms or beneficiaries. This was new information, potentially significant, but without the trust document itself, I couldn't determine its implications for the current situation. More concerning was what wasn't recorded. No recent transfer or pending change in ownership appeared in the records. If Vanessa was finalizing paperwork as her phone conversation suggested, it hadn't yet been filed with the county. This provided a narrow window of opportunity, but for what action, I remained unsure. I requested copies of everything, paying the nominal fee with a sense that these papers, however incomplete, represented my first concrete step toward reclaiming agency in my family's affairs. As I left the building, my phone chimed with a text message from Vanessa. "Father had a difficult night. Doctor adjusting medication. Your visit this evening should be postponed. Will update when appropriate." The clinical tone, the unilateral decision, the vague timeline for my next permitted visit, all exemplified Vanessa's assumption of complete authority. In the past, I would have accepted this directive without question, grateful even for being informed rather than simply finding the door locked upon arrival. But now, with suspicion awakened, I wondered whether Father had truly had a difficult night, or if Vanessa simply wanted to ensure I remained at a distance while she completed whatever arrangements she had set in motion. I considered disregarding her instruction and going to the house anyway. What could she do? Physically bar me from entering? But confrontation without preparation was a fool's approach, and I was finished with playing the fool in the Anderson family drama. Better to use this unexpected time to continue my investigation. My next destination was the law office of Martin Green, a semi-retired attorney who had handled various matters for our family over the years. His connection to my father made him an imperfect confidant, but his institutional knowledge might prove valuable, and his age and established reputation suggested he might be less susceptible to Vanessa's influence than younger attorneys still building their practices. Martin's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian, not unlike our family home, though on a smaller scale. The receptionist, a woman who appeared to be in her 60s, greeted me with professional warmth. "Ms. Anderson, what a pleasant surprise. It's been, goodness, must be 5 or 6 years since we've seen you. How is your father doing? We were all so distressed to hear about his stroke." Her familiar manner momentarily disoriented me. I was so accustomed to being the lesser-known Anderson that recognition caught me off guard. "He's recovering. Slowly. Thank you for asking. Is Mr. Green available? I don't have an appointment, but I was hoping he might have a few minutes." "Let me check," she offered, disappearing through a door behind her desk. The waiting area featured leather chairs that had aged gracefully, acquiring the patina that only genuine quality and proper care can produce. The walls displayed local historical photographs, including one of Maple Avenue circa 1920 that prominently featured our family home. I was studying this image when Martin Green emerged, his silver hair and bow tie exactly as I remembered from childhood visits to our home. "Rebecca Anderson," he said warmly, extending his hand. "What a pleasant surprise indeed. Please come into my office. I always have time for Charles Anderson's granddaughter." I followed him into a space that smelled of leather-bound books, and the faint trace of pipe tobacco, a scent I associated with my grandfather and, by extension, with a time when our family had seemed less fractured by unspoken hierarchies. "Now," he said once we were seated, "what brings you to my humble chambers? Nothing too serious, I hope?" The kindness in his roomy blue eyes nearly undid my composure. How long had it been since someone had looked at me with genuine interest rather than assessment or dismissal? "It's about the family home," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I've recently become concerned about plans for its future that I wasn't aware of until quite accidentally." Martin's expression shifted subtly. "I see. And these plans involve your sister, I presume?" "Yes. I overheard her discussing a title transfer and rezoning applications. Given Father's condition, I'm concerned about decisions being made without proper consideration." Martin leaned back in his chair, fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin, a gesture so reminiscent of my father in thoughtful moments that my throat tightened. "Rebecca, I've known your family for 3 generations. Your grandfather was one of my first clients when I opened this practice, and a dear friend besides. I've handled numerous matters for your father over the years, though I've been less involved since my semi-retirement. What I'm about to say may skirt the edges of professional discretion, but I believe both Charles and Richard would want me to speak plainly with you." He paused, seeming to choose his next words with particular care. "The Anderson family home is indeed held in trust, established during that unpleasantness with the Westridge development 15 years ago. I helped your father create it as protection against potential litigation. The terms of that trust are specific. I didn't handle any recent modifications, if such exist, but I would be very surprised if Richard had substantially altered the original provisions. Can you tell me what those provisions were? I asked, barely daring to hope for concrete information. The trust document itself is confidential, but I can tell you generally that your father was adamant about preserving the home for future generations. He specifically rejected language that would have allowed conversion to commercial use, despite potential tax advantages. Martin's eyes held mine steadily. Richard Anderson may be a businessman to his core, but that house represented something beyond commercial value to him. It was his connection to his father and his father before him. My eyes burned with unexpected tears. This image of my father, sentimental about legacy despite his outward pragmatism, contradicted the emotionally distant figure who had seemed perpetually disappointed in my impractical nature. Was it possible that we shared more common ground than I had believed? Then, if Vanessa is pursuing rezoning? I began. She would be acting against the explicit provisions of the trust, assuming it remains unchanged, Martin confirmed. But Rebecca, these are serious concerns with significant legal implications. You should consult with someone who can formally represent your interests. I'm mostly retired now, and my prior work for your father creates potential conflicts. Nodded, understanding both his message and his unspoken warning. I have an appointment with Patricia Winters tomorrow. An excellent choice, Martin approved. Patricia is thorough and uncompromising. She'll serve you well. He hesitated, then added, Your father always spoke of you with pride, you know. Not perhaps in the ways he expressed pride in Vanessa's business acumen, but he admired your integrity and your appreciation for beauty and history, qualities he recognized in his own mother. This revelation struck me with almost physical force. My grandmother had died before my birth, but family stories painted her as a gentle, artistic soul whose influence had softened my grandfather's hard-driving nature. That my father had seen her qualities in me, had valued them privately even while seeming to dismiss them publicly, rewrote a narrative I had accepted as immutable truth for decades. As I stood to leave, Martin placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. The Anderson determination runs in your veins too, Rebecca. It simply expresses itself differently. Don't underestimate your capacity to stand firm when it matters. I left his office with a strange mixture of emotions swirling within me. Grief for the years of misunderstanding, anger at Vanessa's apparent betrayal, fear of the conflict to come, but beneath all these, something unfamiliar yet powerful was taking root. The determination Martin had named, awakening from dormancy, ready at last to find expression. My appointment with Patricia Winters was scheduled for 2 p.m., leaving me with a morning to prepare. Sleep had brought clarity. I needed to see my father. Vanessa's text postponing my visit felt increasingly suspicious in light of what I'd learned. If she was accelerating plans to transfer ownership, keeping me away from father served her interests. Perfectly. I arrived at the Anderson home just after 9, timing my visit when I knew the day nurse would be present. Helen Okafor had been caring for father since his return from the hospital, a competent, warm-natured woman who maintained professional boundaries while showing genuine compassion for her patient. More importantly, she had no particular loyalty to Vanessa beyond her employment. I parked down the street rather than in the driveway, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid just days earlier, but now felt necessary. The spare key I still carried granted me quiet entry through the side door that led to the kitchen. Helen was sorting medications at the counter when I entered. She turned with mild surprise. Rebecca, I didn't know you were scheduled this morning. Last-minute decision, I explained with a casual smile that belied my racing heart. How is he today? Better than yesterday, actually. The new medication seems to be helping with the agitation. He's in the sunroom having his morning tea. This contradicted Vanessa's claim of a difficult night, requiring postponed visits. Another lie. Another manipulation. I felt a flicker of vindication beneath my anger. Vanessa mentioned he had a rough night. I probed gently. Helen's brow furrowed slightly. Not particularly. He slept straight through from what I understand from the night report. Ms. Vanessa did request we limit visitors for a few days, but she didn't specify that included family. I see. Well, I won't stay long. Just wanted to check in on him. The sunroom occupied the southeast corner of the house, capturing morning light through tall windows. Father sat in his wheelchair, positioned to face the garden. His right side remained largely immobile from the stroke, his once commanding presence diminished by illness, yet not extinguished. Even in diminishment, Richard Anderson maintained an essential dignity. "Morning, Dad," I said softly, moving into his field of vision. He turned slightly, his left eye brightening with recognition. The stroke had affected his speech significantly, reducing his once eloquent expressions to labored words and phrases, but his comprehension remained largely intact. "Becca," he managed, his unaffected hand lifting slightly in greeting. The childhood nickname he hadn't used in decades pierced my heart with unexpected tenderness. I pulled a chair close, angling it to maintain eye contact without forcing him to strain his neck. "I wanted to see how you're doing. Is the new medication helping?" He nodded, a small but definite movement. "Better." "Good. That's good." I hesitated, uncertain how to broach more sensitive topics without causing distress. His recovery depended on minimal stress, according to his doctors, yet the situation demanded clarification that only he could provide. "Dad, I need to ask you something important about the house." I kept my voice gentle but clear. "Is there a family trust that owns the property?" His gaze sharpened, focus intensifying. "Trust. Yes." "Do you remember the details? Who the beneficiaries are?" His forehead creased with concentration, frustration flickering across his features as words failed him. After several attempts, he resorted to a gesture, hand moving back and forth between us. "You and me?" I guessed. "Both of us?" A nod. Then, his hand extended further, encompassing an imaginary third person. "Vanessa, too? All three of us?" Another nod, more emphatic. "The trust includes all three of us," I confirmed, relief washing through me. This aligned with Martin Green's suggestion that my father had valued family legacy over commercial interests regarding the home. But my relief was short-lived, as Father made another gesture, pointing toward the ceiling, then making a writing motion with his hand. "Something written? Upstairs?" I interpreted. He nodded, then struggled to produce a word. "Off. Office." "In your office upstairs? Documents about the trust?" His expression conveyed urgency beneath the physical limitations, an insistence that I understand something critical. "I'll look," I promised. "Is there something specific I should—" The sound of the front door opening interrupted us. Vanessa's voice carried from the foyer as she spoke on her phone. "Should be finalized by end of week. The lawyer assures me—" She fell silent mid-sentence as she entered the sunroom and saw me seated beside our father. Surprise flashed across her features before her professional mask reasserted itself. "Rebecca, I thought I texted you that today wasn't good for visiting." "You did," I acknowledged, maintaining my position. "But I was concerned about Dad and wanted to check on him myself. Helen says he had a good night, actually." Vanessa's eyes flickered to Helen, who had appeared in the doorway. A subtle tightening of her jaw betrayed her displeasure at being contradicted. "The morning has been peaceful," Helen confirmed, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension between the sisters. "Mr. Anderson seems more comfortable with the new medication regimen." "Well, that's fortunate," Vanessa conceded smoothly. "Still, we shouldn't overwhelm him with too much stimulation. The doctor was quite clear about limiting excitement during this adjustment period. Father made a dismissive sound, his good hand waving away her concern. "I think Dad's fine with my being here," I said, finding confidence in his obvious welcome. "I won't stay much longer, but we were having a nice chat." Vanessa glanced at Father, noting his alert expression. Something in her calculation shifted visibly. "Of course, family visits are important. I just worry about his recovery." "We all do," I replied, the politeness of my tone masking growing resolve. "Actually, Dad was just telling me about some documents in his office that I should look at, related to the family trust." The change in Vanessa's demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. A slight stiffening of her shoulders, a momentary freeze in her expression before she regained composure. "Oh? What documents would those be, Dad?" she asked with forced casualness. Father looked between us, his good eye reflecting an awareness of the underlying currents. "Deed," he managed after visible effort. "Original." Vanessa laughed lightly. "The original deed is with the trust paperwork at the bank, Dad. Remember? We moved all important documents to the safe deposit box after the pipe leak last year nearly damaged your office." I watched Father's reaction carefully. His brow furrowed, head shaking slightly in negation. "Not all," he insisted. "Hidden." A flush crept up Vanessa's neck. "You're confused, Dad. The medication sometimes affects your memory. All legal documents are secured at Westlake National." The dismissal was so smooth, so practiced, Vanessa redirecting Father's statements as confusion, establishing herself as the authority on his affairs. I had witnessed this dynamic countless times without recognizing its manipulative nature. "Why don't I look anyway?" I suggested mildly. "If there's nothing there, no harm done. But if Dad remembers something important—" "My office is handling all legal matters for the estate," Vanessa countered. "If you're suddenly interested in property documents, I can have copies made of the relevant materials. But disturbing Dad's private office seems unnecessary and potentially disruptive to his recovery routine." Her opposition only confirmed my suspicion that Father's recollection held significance. "I think Dad wants me to check," I persisted, turning to him for confirmation. "Is that right?" He nodded firmly, gaze fixed on Vanessa with unexpected clarity. "Let her look." Each word emerged with deliberate effort, the command unmistakable despite his impaired speech. Vanessa recognized the futility of further opposition without appearing overtly controlling. "Fine," she conceded, glancing at her watch. "I have a meeting downtown anyway. Helen will be here, of course." The implied surveillance was clear. "We can discuss any concerns you have when I return this afternoon." After Vanessa departed, her exit marked by a too carefully controlled closing of the front door, I spent another half hour with Father, keeping conversation light while inwardly calculating my next steps. When he began showing signs of fatigue, I helped Helen settle him for his morning rest, then made my way upstairs to the office. The room remained as imposing as in my childhood memories, though smaller than I recalled, the diminishment that adult perspective brings to once intimidating spaces. Afternoon sun slanted through Venetian blinds, creating alternating bands of light and shadow across the antique desk where my father had conducted business for decades. I had no clear idea what I was looking for, only Father's insistent hidden and his reference to the original deed. The obvious places: filing cabinets, desk drawers, the wall safe behind the landscape painting, would undoubtedly be places Vanessa had already thoroughly searched if she was indeed attempting to circumvent the family trust. What would Father consider a hiding place? Where would he conceal something truly important from casual discovery, perhaps even from his designated successor? I ran my fingertips along the edge of the desk, admiring the craftsmanship of the mahogany piece that had been commissioned by my great-grandfather. The desk had moved with the family once, from the original downtown office to this home study when my grandfather decided to work primarily from home in his later years. My knuckle caught on a slight irregularity beneath the desktop overhang, a small depression that didn't align with the desk's construction. Crouching down, I examined the spot more carefully. What appeared initially to be a natural variation in the wood grain was, upon closer inspection, a cleverly disguised button flush with the surface. Heart quickening, I pressed it gently. A soft click rewarded my discovery as a narrow drawer, released from the side panel of the desk, a secret compartment invisible when closed, the seam disguised within the wood's natural pattern. The craftsmanship required for such a feature spoke to a level of quality rarely found in modern furniture, the kind of detail I had always appreciated while my sister focused on market value. Within the compartment lay a single manila envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with a wax impression of the Anderson family crest, a design featuring an oak tree that also appeared in the stained glass transom above our front door. With trembling fingers, I withdrew the envelope and broke the seal. Inside, I found several documents, most notably a hand-drawn property survey dated 1897 and a deed written in elegant calligraphy on parchment, the original documentation of my great-great-grandfather's purchase of the land. But more crucially, beneath these historical records lay a more recent document, a supplementary trust agreement dated just 3 years ago, after my mother's passing, but well before my father's. I scanned the legal language with growing amazement. The document, witnessed and notarized, established unequivocally that while the Anderson Family Trust owned the property collectively, a special provision granted me specific rights. In recognition of Rebecca Anderson's commitment to preserving the historical and cultural integrity of the family residence, she shall retain lifetime residential rights regardless of any transfer of ownership interests, and shall have final authority regarding any structural modifications, renovations, or change of use proposals affecting the property. My father had created a legal safeguard ensuring I could never be removed from my childhood home against my will, and more significantly, had granted me veto power over any attempts to fundamentally alter the property, including, presumably, the rezoning Vanessa had been discussing. The document continued. This provision acknowledges Rebecca's unique appreciation for the historical significance of the Anderson residence and her dedication to its preservation, qualities which make her the most appropriate guardian of its architectural and cultural legacy. Tears blurred my vision as I reread this passage. My father, so outwardly focused on business acumen and practical skills, had privately valued precisely those qualities in me that seemed to matter least in the family hierarchy: my appreciation for history, my commitment to preservation, my sentimental attachment to our heritage. While Vanessa received public acknowledgement and grooming for business leadership, I had received this private but profound vote of confidence in an area my father apparently valued deeply, despite his outward emphasis on commercial success. The final page contained a personal letter, handwritten rather than typed. Rebecca, if you are reading this, circumstances have likely necessitated your search for documentation regarding the family home. I have observed your love for this house throughout your life, from your childhood explorations of its hidden corners to your adult dedication to maintaining its historical character. What you may not know is that I share this attachment, though I have rarely expressed it openly. Business demanded a focus on practical matters, on growth and profitability. Your sister excels in these areas as I have, but a family needs more than financial acumen to thrive across generations. It needs members who understand the value of continuity, of beauty for its own sake, of honoring what came before while adapting thoughtfully to what lies ahead. You possess these qualities in abundance. They come from my mother, qualities I recognized but struggled to nurture in myself, given the demands of providing for our family during difficult economic times. I have made provisions ensuring your sister's business talents will secure the family's financial future. This document ensures your complementary talents will secure our heritage and legacy. Neither role is superior, both are essential. With respect and confidence, your father. I pressed the letter to my chest, overwhelmed by this posthumous, for he was in a sense partially gone from us already, acknowledgement of my value to the family. All the years of feeling secondary, of believing my interests and abilities were considered lesser, and all along, my father had not only recognized my unique contributions, but had taken concrete steps to ensure they would be honored. The discovery was vindicating, but it also brought sadness for the decades of misunderstanding. The emotional distance that had never needed to exist had we been able to communicate more openly. Still, there was profound comfort in knowing that my father had seen me, truly seen me, even when I believed myself invisible in Vanessa's shadow. I carefully replaced the documents in their envelope, but rather than returning them to their hiding place, I slipped them into my bag. The meeting with Patricia Winters was still hours away, but I was no longer entering that consultation empty-handed. I had concrete evidence of my father's intentions, legal protection for both my residents, rights, and the historical integrity of our family home. As I descended the stairs, I caught sight of my reflection in the entryway mirror, the same mirror that had witnessed generations of Andersons coming and going from this beloved home. The woman looking back at me appeared different somehow, her posture straighter, her expression more assured. For the first time in my adult life, I felt not just equal to Vanessa, but uniquely empowered in my own right. The Anderson determination had indeed awakened, and with it, a new chapter was beginning. Not just in the story of our family home, but in my understanding of myself and my place within the Anderson legacy. Patricia Winters's office occupied the top floor of a renovated textile mill in Clayton, its exposed brick walls and steel beams honoring the building's industrial heritage, while its modern furnishings spoke to present purpose. The attorney herself embodied a similar blend of tradition and practicality, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a precise bun, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, tablet computer rather than legal pad in hand as she reviewed the documents I'd brought. "This supplementary trust agreement is extraordinarily clear," she noted, scrolling through the digital photos I'd taken of each page. "Your father granted you specific protections regarding both residency and property modifications. No ambiguity whatsoever." The validation sent a wave of relief through me. Then Vanessa can't sell or rezone the property without my consent? Not legally, no. Your veto power is explicitly stated. Patricia removed her glasses, fixing me with a direct gaze. "However, based on what you've shared about your sister's actions, I'm concerned she may be proceeding without awareness of this document, or worse, with awareness but deliberate disregard." You think she'd ignore a legal document even if she knew about it? The possibility shouldn't have shocked me given recent revelations, yet it did. Family property disputes can bring out unexpected behaviors even in otherwise law-abiding individuals. People rationalize actions they would never condone in others when heritage, money, and family dynamics intersect. She tapped the screen, thoughtfully. "What concerns me most is the mention of paperwork being finalized by end of week. That suggests legal documents are being prepared, possibly based on her power of attorney for your father. Could she use that to override the Cadiz trust agreement? Not legitimately. Power of attorney grants authority to act on your father's behalf regarding his personal affairs, but it doesn't supersede established trust provisions or give her the right to dispose of assets he's already placed in trust with specific conditions." Patricia's expression grew more serious. "However, if the attorney handling these new arrangements is unaware of the supplementary agreement," the implication hung heavily between us. Vanessa might be leveraging her power of attorney to create documentation that appeared legitimate on its face, essentially attempting to circumvent the trust provisions through selective disclosure. What should I do? I asked, the question encompassing legal strategy, family ethics, and personal boundaries all at once. Patricia considered for a moment. First, we secure the original documents. These photos are useful, but we need the physical documents properly filed and recorded. Second, we issue formal notice to all parties involved: your sister, any attorneys she's working with, the county recorder's office, establishing your awareness of your rights under the trust and your intention to exercise them. She continued, outlining a methodical approach to asserting my legal position while protecting my father's interests and the property itself. As she spoke, I found myself imagining Vanessa's reaction when confronted with evidence of her attempted manipulation. Would she deny knowledge of the supplementary agreement? Claim she was acting in father's best interests? Attempt to discredit me as emotionally unstable or financially irresponsible? You've gone quiet, Patricia observed. Having second thoughts? Not about protecting the house, I clarified. I'm just considering the personal cost. Vanessa and I have never been close, but this will likely sever whatever relationship remains. And the impact on father during his recovery. Patricia's expression softened slightly. These concerns speak well of your character, Rebecca. But consider this: the stress of family conflict versus the stress of having his explicit wishes disregarded without his knowledge. Which would distress your father more if he were fully cognizant? The question crystallized something essential. My hesitation wasn't protecting father, but avoiding confrontation, a pattern established throughout my life. The true disservice to him would be allowing his carefully considered provisions to be circumvented because I lacked courage to enforce them. You're right, I acknowledged. We should proceed as you've outlined. 2 hours later, I left Patricia's office with a comprehensive action plan and the first formal documents already being prepared for delivery the following morning. Rather than dread, I felt a curious lightness, the unburdening that comes with committing to a difficult but necessary path. The drive back to Westlake gave me time to prepare mentally for the imminent confrontation with Vanessa. Patricia had advised against direct engagement before our legal notifications were delivered, but practical realities made complete avoidance impossible. I needed to retrieve the original documents from the house, and more importantly, I needed to check on father, whose alertness that morning had highlighted how much I had missed in allowing Vanessa to restrict my access. The setting sun cast long shadows across Maple Avenue as I approached our family home. Vanessa's car occupied the driveway, confirming she had returned from her downtown meeting. I parked on the street again, no longer bothering with the pretense of casual visitation. The time for half measures had passed. The front door opened before I reached it, Vanessa framed in the entryway with arms crossed defensively across her chest. Back so soon? I suppose Helen told you I'd returned. Actually, no. I've been in Clayton all afternoon. Is father awake? I'd like to see him before I leave. He's resting. Dr. Mercer adjusted his medication again. He was quite agitated after your visit this morning. The accusation was thinly veiled, suggesting my presence had somehow deteriorated father's condition. I nodded, neither accepting nor challenging her statement. I'll check on him briefly then. I won't disturb him if he's actually sleeping. Vanessa didn't move from the doorway. Rebecca, before you go upstairs, we should talk about what you found in Dad's office. The directness surprised me. I had expected denial, perhaps accusations about invading private space. Instead, Vanessa was acknowledging my discovery, suggesting Helen had reported my activities despite her seemingly neutral stance. Yes, we should, I agreed, maintaining composure. But I'd prefer to see father first. After a moment's hesitation, Vanessa stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The familiar scent of lemon oil furniture polish and aged hardwood embraced me, the home's essence unchanged despite the tense circumstances. I moved toward the stairs, conscious of Vanessa following at a measured distance. Father's bedroom had once been a formal parlor, converted after his stroke to eliminate the need for navigating stairs. The adaptation had been thoughtfully executed, preserving original architectural details while accommodating medical necessities. I knocked softly before entering. The room was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the evening light. Father lay in the adjustable hospital bed that had replaced his antique four-poster, eyes closed but breathing patterns suggesting wakefulness rather than sleep. The night nurse, Gabriella, sat quietly in the corner, looking up from her book as I entered. "He's just resting," she confirmed in a hushed voice. "Had his dinner about an hour ago. He can have visitors if you keep it brief." I approached the bed, touching Father's hand gently. "Dad?" "It's Rebecca." His eyes opened immediately, confirming my suspicion that he hadn't been sleeping. Despite Vanessa's claim of agitation, he appeared calm and lucid, even managing a small smile when he recognized me. "Found?" he asked, the single word carrying multitudes. "Yes," I confirmed quietly. "I found the documents. Everything's going to be all right." Relief visibly washed over him, his good hand squeezing mine with surprising strength. Behind me, I sensed rather than saw Vanessa's presence in the doorway, her silence more telling than any protest. "Rest now," I told him. "I'll handle things from here." He nodded, eyes already drifting closed, but his grip maintained its pressure momentarily. Affirmation, encouragement, perhaps even apology for the years of misunderstanding and the conflict now unavoidable. I turned to find Vanessa watching. This exchange with an unreadable expression. Without speaking, she gestured toward the hallway, then led the way to Father's office. The room felt different now, its imposing atmosphere diminished by knowledge of the secret it had contained, and by my newfound understanding of my father's true regard for me. Vanessa closed the door behind us, then moved to the desk, trailing, her fingers along its polished surface in an unconscious echo of my earlier exploration. "You found the hidden drawer," she stated flatly, "and the supplementary trust agreement." "Yes." There seemed no point in elaboration. She nodded, a short, sharp movement. "I suspected something like this existed. Dad became very protective of this desk after Mom died, wouldn't let me organize his papers or modernize his filing system, but I didn't know where he'd hidden it, or exactly what it contained." The admission startled me. "You knew about the agreement?" "Not specifically, no. But I knew Dad had made some arrangement involving you in the house. He mentioned it once when we were discussing long-term asset management, said he'd taken care of Rebecca's connection to the family home. I assumed he meant some minor provision, a guaranteed apartment in the converted property perhaps, or first right of refusal if it ever sold." She shook her head slightly. "I never imagined he'd given you veto power over development plans." The casual way she referenced conversion or sale of our family home, as though its transformation was inevitable, only the details requiring resolution, reinforced how fundamentally different our values remained despite this moment of apparent honesty. "Why not simply ask me about it?" I questioned. "When you decided to pursue rezoning, why the secrecy, the manipulation, keeping me away from Father?" Vanessa's laugh held no humor. "Would you have cooperated with plans to optimize this property's potential? You who spent thousands restoring original moldings that most people never even notice? Who fought me on replacing outdated wiring because the modern fixtures wouldn't be period appropriate?" It is precisely the point," she interrupted. "You've always been willing to sacrifice practical considerations for sentimentality. This house sits on nearly an acre of prime commercial real estate in a rapidly developing area. Do you have any idea of its potential value with proper rezoning? The trust could realize 5 times its residential worth. Funds that could secure Dad's care for the rest of his life, expand the business, create opportunities for future generations." While erasing our heritage in the process, I countered. This isn't just real estate, Vanessa. It's our family's history, our connection to previous generations. There's value in that too, even if it doesn't appear on a balance sheet. Heritage doesn't pay for round-the-clock nursing care or experimental treatments that insurance won't cover. Her voice sharpened. Your romantic notions about preserving the past are a luxury we cannot afford with Dad's condition requiring increasingly expensive interventions. The argument might have swayed me once. Guilt over prioritizing sentiment while Father's health hung in the balance. But Martin Green's insights and Father's own letter had clarified something crucial. The choice between heritage and practical needs was a false dichotomy, a framework that devalued what couldn't be monetized. If Father's care is truly your concern, I said carefully, then we can discuss financial arrangements that don't require destroying the house. The business is profitable, and there are other properties in the Anderson portfolio without the same historical significance. Vanessa's expression shifted subtly. So you've been investigating the business affairs too? No, I admitted. But I know enough about Father's operations to understand the family home isn't his only asset. There are alternatives that honor both his healthcare needs and his explicit wishes regarding this property. A new calculation seemed to be taking place behind Vanessa's eyes. The sister I had known throughout my life, competitive, controlling, convinced of her superior understanding, was recalibrating in real time, adjusting to the unexpected challenge of a sibling who could no longer be dismissed or manipulated. What exactly are you proposing? She asked finally. A collaborative approach, one that respects Father's intentions regarding both the business and the family home. I maintained steady eye contact, refusing to retreat into my habitual deference. But it starts with you halting whatever legal processes you've initiated regarding property transfer or rezoning. Vanessa moved to the window, looking out over the garden where generations of Andersons had gathered for summer evenings. For several moments she remained silent, her profile sharp against the fading light. You've changed, she observed without turning. A month ago you would have accepted whatever explanation I offered, however implausible. The assessment was accurate but incomplete. I haven't changed so much as awakened to patterns I previously accepted without question. Father saw qualities in me that neither you nor I fully recognized, qualities he valued enough to legally protect. She turned then, her expression suggesting not anger, but a reluctant reassessment. And you're prepared to enforce those legal protections? I've already begun the process, I confirmed. Patricia Winters is preparing formal notifications as we speak. Vanessa's eyebrows rose at the attorney's name, recognition of a formidable legal mind. You're not wasting time. I learned from watching you all these years. When something matters, you move decisively. I allowed a small smile to soften the underlying challenge. The family home matters to me. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Between us. Not reconciliation exactly, but a recalibration. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, Vanessa was seeing me not as her easily managed younger sister, but as an equal advocate with legitimate authority in family affairs. I'll need time to review my options, she said finally, the closest approximation to concession I could realistically expect. Of course, but all current legal processes regarding the property need to pause immediately. She nodded once, a businesslike acknowledgement rather than surrender. I'll contact my attorney. In the morning. As I prepared to leave, gathering the original documents I had come to retrieve, Vanessa spoke again, her voice holding an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. Do you think we could have avoided this? If we'd communicated differently over the years? The question held layers of potential meaning, regret, self-justification, genuine curiosity. I considered my response carefully, understanding its importance to whatever relationship might emerge from this confrontation. I think we were both living out roles assigned to us so early that we never questioned their limitations, I answered finally. You were the business mind. I was the impractical dreamer. Neither description was ever completely accurate, but we performed our parts convincingly, even to ourselves. Vanessa absorbed this assessment, neither accepting nor rejecting it. And now? Now we have an opportunity to discover who we actually are beyond those roles, to find a way forward that honors both our strengths. I met her gaze directly. I won't compromise on protecting the house, but I'm willing to collaborate on everything else if you are. No dramatic reconciliation followed. Our history and differences ran too deep for such immediate resolution. But as I departed with the document secured in my bag and a clear path forward established, I felt a profound shift in my understanding of both my sister and myself. The Anderson determination had awakened not to destroy, but to transform, to protect what mattered while creating space for new possibilities neither of us had previously imagined. The family home stood solid and serene in the gathering twilight. As I drove away, its century-old foundations unshaken by the day's confrontation, like the house itself, I had discovered unexpected strength beneath a facade others had underestimated. Strength not of hardness or domination, but of enduring commitment to what truly mattered across generations. Morning light filtered through the stained glass transom, casting prisms of color across the entryway floor as I unlocked the door to my childhood home. The house felt different now, less a monument to Anderson family achievements and more a living entity I was responsible for protecting. Patricia Winters had filed our legal notifications the previous day, officially establishing my position regarding the property and temporarily halting Vanessa's plans. I had expected resistance, perhaps even retaliation. Instead, a text message had arrived last night. We should discuss Father's care schedule. 10 a.m. tomorrow at the house. V. The brevity was typical Vanessa, but the implicit acknowledgement of my right to be involved represented a significant shift. I arrived early, hoping for some time with Father before Vanessa appeared. Helen greeted me with her usual professional warmth, though I detected a new undertone of respect in her manner. He's having a good morning, she reported. Already finished breakfast and his therapy exercises. Dr. Mercer stopped by yesterday evening and was pleased with his progress. Has Vanessa been adjusting your schedule or instructions regarding my visits? I asked directly. Helen's momentary hesitation confirmed my suspicions before she answered. There was some guidance about limiting disruptions, but Ms. Vanessa clarified yesterday that you should have full access. Another small victory, though the fact that Vanessa had felt entitled to restrict my contact with Father in the first place still rankled. I found him in the garden room, seated in his wheelchair beside the open French doors. A sketch pad rested on his lap, his good hand laboriously tracing what appeared to be a building outline. Morning, Dad. Drawing again. I kept my tone light, though the sight of him returning to an activity he had enjoyed before his stroke filled me with quiet joy. He looked up, his face brightening. Becca, look. He tapped the pad with his finger. I moved closer to examine the sketch. Despite the shakiness of the lines, I recognized the basic layout of the Anderson home's first floor. Beside it, he had begun what appeared to be a modified version with notations I couldn't immediately decipher. It's the house, I affirmed. Are you planning some changes? He nodded, frustration crossing his features as he struggled to articulate his thoughts. Since the stroke, Father's comprehension remained far ahead of his expressive abilities, a brilliant mind trapped behind neurological barriers. Show me, I encouraged, pulling a chair beside his wheelchair. For the next 20 minutes, through a combination of single words, gestures, and modifications to the sketch, Father conveyed his vision, adaptations to make the historic home more accessible while preserving its architectural integrity. A discreet elevator disguised within what was currently a rarely used coat closet. Widened doorways that maintained original moldings. Bathroom modifications concealed behind period-appropriate fixtures. The level of detail was remarkable, suggesting he had been contemplating these changes well before his stroke, perhaps even before the supplementary trust agreement that granted me authority over structural modifications. The realization that Father had been planning for his own potential needs while ensuring the home's historical character would be maintained touched me deeply. "These are brilliant solutions," I told him, genuinely impressed by the careful balance of practicality and preservation. "We could implement these without compromising the house's historical designation." He tapped another section of the drawing, making a sweeping gesture that seemed to encompass more than just the immediate modifications. "Future?" I guessed. "You're thinking about future needs too?" A definitive nod. "What kind of future adaptations are you envisioning?" I asked, curious about his longer-term perspective. The sound of the front door opening interrupted before he could respond. Moments later, Vanessa appeared in the garden room doorway, her attire impeccably professional as always. A navy pantsuit that projected authority, pearl earrings our mother had often worn providing the only personal touch. "I see you're already here," she observed, then noticed the sketch on Father's lap. "What's this?" Rather than answering for him, I waited as Father deliberately turned the pad toward Vanessa. She moved closer, examining the drawings with the focused attention she typically reserved for financial statements. "Accessibility modifications," she noted, comprehension dawning. "You've been planning these for a while, haven't you, Dad?" He nodded, watching her reaction carefully. "These are actually quite thoughtful," Vanessa acknowledged, genuine surprise evident in her tone. "The elevator location is particularly clever, utilizing that awkward closet space without disturbing any load-bearing walls." The technical assessment was quintessentially Vanessa, evaluating practicality first and foremost. Yet there was something new in her approach, a willingness to consider solutions that didn't require fundamental transformation of the property. "I was just telling Dad how these changes could be implemented while maintaining the home's historical designation," I offered, extending a tentative olive branch. "They address practical needs without compromising the architectural integrity." Vanessa looked between Father and me, something unspoken passing across her features. "That's actually the kind of compromise I hadn't considered sufficiently." The admission, however qualified, represented a seismic shift coming from Vanessa, who typically defended her positions with unwavering certainty. Father made an emphatic gesture, pointing to Vanessa, then me, then bringing his hands together. "I think Dad's suggesting we work together on this," I interpreted, meeting Vanessa's gaze directly. "Combining your practical knowledge of construction and costs with my understanding of historical preservation requirements." "A collaboration," Vanessa stated, testing the concept as though examining an unfamiliar business proposal. After a moment's consideration, she added, "It could work. Your expertise in historical requirements would streamline the approval process with the Preservation Committee." The acknowledgement of my expertise, an area Vanessa had previously dismissed as mere sentimentality, felt like a significant concession. Before I could respond, Helen appeared to remind us of Father's scheduled physical therapy session. "We should continue this discussion elsewhere," Vanessa suggested as Father was wheeled away. "Perhaps in the study?" The location wasn't accidental. The study had been our mother's domain, a neutral territory within the home that belonged to neither Vanessa's business world nor my preservation interests. It remained largely unchanged since Mother's passing, her collection of botanical illustrations still adorning the walls, her antique writing desk positioned to catch the north light she had preferred for correspondence. Once settled in the comfortable window seats that had hosted countless mother-daughter conversations in earlier years, Vanessa surprised me by addressing the underlying tension directly. "I owe you an apology," she began, the formal phrasing characteristic of her approach to difficult conversations. not just for attempting to circumvent the trust provisions, but for the years of dismissing your perspective on the family home. The unexpected acknowledgement momentarily left me speechless. Vanessa Anderson did not apologize. She justified, rationalized, occasionally made strategic concessions, but outright admission of error was unprecedented. "What changed?" I asked finally. She gestured vaguely toward Father's room. "His drawings. The fact that he's been planning these modifications for years, possibly since before his stroke." She paused, seeming to choose her next words with uncharacteristic care. "It suggests a level of forethought regarding his potential needs that I failed to recognize. I assumed his attachment to the house's historical elements was sentimental rather than practical." The distinction revealed volumes about Vanessa's worldview. Practical considerations deserved respect, while sentimental ones could be dismissed. Yet here was evidence that preservation and practicality weren't opposing forces, but complementary approaches to the same fundamental goal: maintaining a home that served its inhabitants while honoring its heritage. "I think Dad has always understood that balance better than either of us realized," I suggested. "His business acumen and appreciation for heritage weren't separate aspects of his personality. They informed each other." Vanessa considered this perspective, her analytical mind visibly processing its implications. "Like his letter to you? In the supplementary agreement." I read it. Patricia Winters included a copy with the legal notification. Her expression held a complexity I wasn't accustomed to seeing, something between regret and revelation. "He valued qualities in you that I interpreted as impractical." I never understood why he insisted on preserving certain elements of the house that seemed inefficient or outdated from a business perspective. "Because not everything valuable can be quantified on a balance sheet," I offered quietly. "Some forms of wealth transcend financial calculation." To my surprise, Vanessa nodded slowly. "Mother used to say something similar when I would question why we kept furniture that required specialized maintenance or artwork that needed expensive conservation. She told me some things were valuable precisely because they couldn't be easily replaced. Their uniqueness made them irreplaceable." The mention of our mother created an unexpected moment of connection. For all our differences, we shared memories of the woman who had balanced Father's business focus with appreciation for beauty and history, a balance both daughters had inherited in different measures, but neither had fully integrated. "I think that's why Father granted me authority over structural changes while keeping you in charge of business decisions," I suggested. "He recognized we each had strengths the other lacked. Perhaps he hoped eventually we'd learn to work together rather than against each other." Vanessa's smile held a touch of rueful acknowledgement. "If so, it took a stroke, a hidden document, and legal intervention to achieve his goal. Not exactly the smooth transition he might have envisioned." The dry observation, so characteristic of Vanessa's understated humor, surprised a genuine laugh from me. The Anderson sisters never chose the easy path. This moment of shared amusement eased the tension that had dominated our interactions for years. What followed was the most productive conversation we'd had as adults, a methodical discussion of Father's immediate needs, the necessary home modifications, potential costs, and preservation requirements. Vanessa's business acumen proved invaluable as we outlined a project timeline and budget. My knowledge of historical restoration connected us with specialized contractors who could implement Father's accessibility designs while maintaining the home's period integrity. For the first time, our different perspectives and skills functioned as complementary strengths rather than competing priorities. "There's something else we should discuss," Vanessa said as our planning session concluded. "The Anderson family trust provisions regarding decision-making authority." I tensed slightly, wary of revisiting territory that had nearly fractured our family completely. "What about them?" "They're inadequate as currently structured," she stated with characteristic directness. The separation of authority, you controlling structural decisions, me managing financial aspects, creates unnecessary complications when integrated planning is clearly beneficial. Before I could object, she continued, I'm not suggesting we change your authority over preservation matters. Rather, I think we should modify the trust to formalize collaborative decision-making for major changes affecting both the property's historical character and its practical functionality. The proposal was unexpected, not an attempt to diminish my role, but to create a framework requiring cooperation. It represented a fundamental shift in Vanessa's approach from competition to collaboration, from hierarchical authority to shared responsibility. That actually makes sense, I acknowledged, recognizing the practical wisdom in the suggestion. It would prevent either of us from making unilateral decisions that affect both aspects of the property. Exactly. And it would better serve Father's apparent intention that we combine our different perspectives. Vanessa hesitated, then added more quietly, it might also help repair some of the damage I've caused to our relationship by attempting to circumvent your authority. The admission of relationship damage, and her role in causing it, represented another unprecedented moment of vulnerability from my typically guarded sister. Rather than highlighting this unusual display, I focused on the path forward. I think Father would approve of that modification, I agreed. We can discuss it with Patricia to ensure the language properly balances both our areas of concern. As our meeting concluded and we walked together toward the front door, Vanessa paused before a family photograph I had always particularly loved, one taken at my college graduation, before our mother's passing, when the Anderson family still presented a united front to the world. In the image, Father stood proudly between his daughters, Mother's hand resting lightly on my shoulder. We were a good team once, Vanessa observed, studying the photograph with unusual sentimentality. Before competition and separate paths pulled us in different directions. Maybe we could be again, I suggested. Not identical, but complementary. The way Father apparently intended. Vanessa extended her hand in a gesture more characteristic of her business dealings than family interactions. To a new Anderson partnership, then, balancing preservation and progress. I accepted the handshake, recognizing it as Vanessa's most authentic expression of commitment. To partnership, I agreed. As she departed for her afternoon appointments, I remained in the entryway, contemplating the photograph that had caught her attention. The family captured there had been more complex than its harmonious appearance suggested. Existing tensions, and future conflicts already present beneath the surface unity. Yet there had been genuine connection too. Bonds of shared history and intertwined identity that neither time nor disagreement had completely severed. The hidden property deed had changed everything, not by granting me power over Vanessa or victory in a family struggle, but by illuminating a path toward integration of our differences. A path Father had envisioned before either daughter was capable of recognizing its value. The Anderson family home stood as it had for generations, its foundations secure despite the recent turbulence. But something had fundamentally shifted within its walls. A rebalancing of power, yes, but more importantly, a recognition that true family legacy consisted not merely of physical property or financial assets, but of the values, perspectives, and complementary strengths that each generation contributed to the ongoing story. For the first time in years, I felt not just at home in the physical structure, but at home in my identity as an Anderson, no longer the invisible daughter, but a recognized guardian of heritage with her own distinct and valued voice in the family's continuing narrative. 3 weeks after our agreement to collaborate, Vanessa and I found ourselves in a meeting neither of us had anticipated. The Westlake Historical Preservation Society had requested our presence at their monthly board gathering, the formal invitation, offering no explanation beyond urgent matters regarding the Anderson property. It's likely about the modification permits, I suggested as we walked together toward the Society's headquarters in the restored train station at the edge of town. The accessibility changes will require their approval, even with the designs, maintaining historical integrity. Vanessa nodded, consulting her phone calendar. I've allowed 2 hours for this meeting, but I have a client presentation at 4. Let's hope they're efficient. This pragmatic approach to our shared responsibilities had become our new normal. Vanessa handling timeframes and logistics, me navigating the interpersonal nuances of community relationships. The complementary system worked surprisingly well once we stopped viewing our differences as weaknesses to be corrected. Eleanor Whittington, the Society's chairperson for over 2 decades, greeted us in the main gallery. At 78, Eleanor retained the commanding presence that had made her a formidable advocate for historical preservation throughout Westlake's rapid development. The Anderson sisters together at last, she observed with the directness of someone whose age had eliminated any remaining filter. Your father would be pleased to see this cooperation. How is Richard's recovery progressing? Steady improvement, Vanessa answered. His speech therapy is showing particular promise lately. His architectural sketching has returned as well, I added. The neurologist says creative activities are stimulating neural pathways that help with other functions. Eleanor nodded, approvingly. Creative engagement is powerful medicine. Now come along. The board is waiting, and we have an unusual situation to discuss. She led us into the conference room where 8 board members sat around an antique table that had once served as the station's ticket counter. Introductions were brief, the atmosphere more formal than the typical preservation committee meeting I occasionally attended. Whatever this unusual situation entailed, it clearly warranted special attention. Eleanor took her position at the head of the table and opened without preamble. The Anderson family has been central to Westlake's architectural heritage for generations. Your home represents one of our finest examples of preserved Victorian domestic architecture, which brings us to the purpose of today's meeting. She nodded to a younger board member who distributed folders to everyone present. Inside mine, I found photographs of damage to several historic buildings downtown, water stains on ceilings, cracked plaster walls, foundation issues visible in basement areas. Last month's unprecedented rainfall revealed structural vulnerabilities in several historic properties along Main Street, Eleanor continued. The Henderson Building, Millwright's Corner, and the old First National Bank all sustained significant water damage. Preliminary engineering assessments indicate the century-old storm drainage system beneath the historic district has finally failed. Vanessa, ever focused on practical implications, asked, "How does this concern our family home? It's located on higher ground, away from the affected drainage basin." Eleanor's expression shifted to something I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty, perhaps even a touch of desperation beneath her usual confidence. The rehabilitation project is estimated at $3 million, she explained. The Society's Emergency Preservation Fund covers barely a quarter of that amount. State grants might provide another quarter, but that leaves a significant shortfall. For a project that must begin before winter to prevent catastrophic damage to our historic district. I began to understand the direction of this conversation. You're seeking donors to cover the remaining costs. In a manner of speaking, Eleanor confirmed. Though we're offering something in exchange. She hesitated, then continued more carefully. The Society is aware of recent discussions regarding potential modifications to the Anderson home for accessibility purposes. The diplomatic phrasing made me wonder how much community gossip had circulated about our family dispute. Westlake's size ensured that little remained truly private, particularly among families as established as ours. We've submitted preliminary plans for approval, I acknowledged. Designs that maintain historical integrity while accommodating modern needs. Yes, excellent plans, Eleanor agreed quickly. Which leads me to our proposition. The Society would fast-track approval for your modifications and provide historical consultation services at no cost throughout the implementation. Additionally, we would nominate the Anderson home for inclusion in the National Register with our full endorsement. National Register listing was prestigious, conferring both status and potential tax benefits. It was something I had long believed. Our home deserved but had never pursued, knowing Father's reluctance to invite additional regulatory oversight of his property. In exchange for? Vanessa prompted, her business instincts detecting the unspoken condition. Eleanor drew a deep breath. In exchange for the Anderson family serving as lead donors for the drainage rehabilitation project, specifically a contribution of $1 million, which would allow work to commence immediately. The amount hung in the air between us. $1 million was substantial by any standard, far exceeding typical philanthropic expectations even for families of our standing in the community. Vanessa's expression remained neutral, her years of business negotiations serving her well. That's a significant request, Ms. Whittington. While the Anderson family has always supported community preservation, this figure exceeds standard charitable giving parameters by a considerable margin. We understand the magnitude, Eleanor. Acknowledged? However, without this drainage rehabilitation, the historic district faces progressive structural damage that would eventually impact property values throughout Westlake, including the valuation of Anderson Real Estate's substantial holdings downtown. The strategic appeal to business interests demonstrated Eleanor's shrewdness. She was offering Vanessa a practical justification for what might otherwise be dismissed as mere sentiment or community obligation. We would need time to consider this proposal, I interjected, sensing Vanessa's instinctive move toward rejection. The financial implications require consultation with our trustees and advisors. Of course, Eleanor agreed, though I should mention that the Petersons have expressed interest in being named primary benefactors if another donor doesn't emerge by month's end. The mention of the Petersons, our family's longtime social rivals whose new money ostentation had always irritated Father, was another calculated move. Eleanor Whittington might appear a gentle preservation enthusiast, but decades of fundraising had honed her ability to leverage subtle competitive instincts. Once outside the meeting, walking back toward the parking lot, Vanessa finally spoke. $1 million for drainage infrastructure that should rightfully be the city's responsibility. The Preservation Society has overreached significantly. Her assessment wasn't wrong from a strictly business perspective. Yet something about the situation nagged at me, an opportunity beyond the straightforward transaction Eleanor had proposed. What if we countered with a different approach? I suggested as we reached Vanessa's precisely parked BMW. Not just writing a check, but creating something more lasting. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Her interest piqued despite her initial rejection. What do you have in mind? An Anderson Preservation Foundation, I proposed, the concept crystallizing as, I spoke. Instead of a one-time donation, we establish an ongoing fund specifically for infrastructure maintenance supporting historic properties. It addresses the immediate crisis while creating a sustainable solution for future needs. The idea sparked visible interest in Vanessa's analytical mind. A foundation would offer tax advantages beyond a simple charitable contribution. We could structure it as an endowment, using investment returns to fund annual grants while maintaining the principal. Exactly, and it positions the Anderson family as committed to long-term community preservation, rather than simply responding to a crisis. The foundation could become part of our family legacy, continuing for generations. Vanessa considered this expansion of my initial concept, adding layers of financial strategy that hadn't occurred to me. We could allocate specific properties from the Anderson portfolio to generate dedicated revenue streams for the foundation. The Montgomery building is nearly fully depreciated, but still produces reliable income. If designated for foundation support, its revenues would provide approximately $120,000 annually. The rapid calculation and immediate identification of a suitable property demonstrated why Vanessa's business acumen had earned Father's confidence. Where I saw conceptual opportunity, she envisioned practical implementation. Our complementary perspectives creating something neither would have developed independently. The society would likely accept a structured commitment over a simple donation, I noted, especially if it promises sustainable funding rather than a one-time solution. Yes, but we should negotiate additional benefits beyond what they've offered, Vanessa countered, transitioning smoothly into strategy mode. National Register nomination is valuable, but if we're establishing a foundation, we should request naming rights for the drainage project itself. The Anderson Infrastructure Preservation Initiative creates ongoing recognition beyond the initial contribution. The suggestion surprised me, not because it was inappropriate, but because it reflected actual enthusiasm for the preservation aspect rather than mere financial calculation. Vanessa was engaging with the historic preservation elements that had previously been solely my domain, just as I was considering the financial structures that had traditionally been hers. We should discuss this with Father, I suggested as we prepared to part ways. The foundation would represent a significant new direction for family resources. Vanessa nodded agreement. I'll have preliminary numbers ready by tomorrow morning. Can you research successful preservation foundations in similar communities? Models we might adapt for Westlake's specific needs? The assignment of complementary tasks happened so naturally that neither of us remarked on how dramatically our working relationship had evolved in mere weeks. The sister who had once dismissed my impractical interests was now actively seeking my expertise in preservation matters. That evening, I outlined our foundation concept for Father, whose improving communication skills allowed him to ask pertinent questions and offer occasional suggestions. His evident pleasure at our collaborative approach confirmed what his hidden letter had stated. He had always hoped his daughters would combine their different strengths, rather than allowing them to become sources of division. Good team, he managed with visible effort, gesturing between the sketch of our proposed foundation structure and me. Like Mother. The comparison to our mother, who had balanced Father's business focus with appreciation for community and heritage, felt like the highest compliment he could offer. It acknowledged something I had long doubted, that my different approach to the Anderson legacy had value equal to Vanessa's more profit-oriented perspective. The following afternoon, Vanessa and I presented our counterproposal to Eleanor and the Society's executive committee. Rather than the requested $1 million donation, we offered the establishment of the Anderson Historic Infrastructure Foundation, with an initial endowment of $1. $5 million, structured to provide both immediate funding for the drainage crisis and sustainable support for future preservation needs. Eleanor's expression as we outlined the comprehensive approach shifted from cautious hope to undisguised delight. This exceeds our most optimistic expectations, she admitted when we concluded. A sustainable funding mechanism has been the Society's unrealized dream for decades. The foundation represents our family's commitment to Westlake's architectural heritage, I explained, not just as property owners but as stewards of community history. With practical provisions ensuring fiscal responsibility and measurable outcomes, Vanessa added, highlighting the accountability mechanisms she had insisted on incorporating. As the committee members exchanged glances of barely restrained excitement, I experienced a moment of profound realization. This foundation represented not just a solution to the immediate preservation crisis, but a redemption of sorts, transforming what could have been a bitter family schism over property rights into a united contribution to our community's future. Walking back to the Anderson home afterward, Vanessa broke our companionable silence with an observation uncharacteristically reflective for her usually forward-focused mindset. Father's stroke was devastating, she said quietly. Yet without it, we might never have discovered the hidden deed, confronted our differences, or found this new direction. There's something almost providential I suggested when she hesitated. I was going to say ironically efficient, she admitted with a small smile. But your word is better, more fitting for what's happening here. The admission that my perspective might sometimes offer a more suitable framework than her own represented another subtle shift in our evolving relationship. Not erasure of our differences, but growing appreciation for their complementary nature. As we approached the Victorian silhouette of our family home, its gables and turrets outlined against the afternoon sky, I was struck by how its appearance remained constant while its meaning in our lives had transformed so completely. No longer a battleground for competing visions or a symbol of unequal family dynamics, it had become something my preservation-minded heart had always valued most. A bridge between past and future, connecting generations through shared legacy. The hidden property deed had indeed changed everything, not by transferring power from one sister to another, but by revealing a third path neither of us had recognized. Like the historic home itself, the Anderson family legacy was strongest when it honored its foundations, while adapting thoughtfully to present needs and future possibilities. For the first time, I understood that preservation at its best was never about freezing the past in amber. It was about carrying forward what remained valuable while creating space for new growth, a principle that applied to family relationships as much as to architectural heritage. The discovery that transformed our understanding of property had ultimately transformed something far more valuable, our understanding of ourselves and each other. 6 months after establishing the Anderson Historic Infrastructure Foundation, the practical impact of our initiative was becoming visible throughout Westlake's historic district. The drainage rehabilitation project had progressed efficiently, under Vanessa's oversight, while I coordinated with preservation specialists to ensure construction methods respected the historical integrity of affected buildings. On a crisp autumn morning, I walked through downtown, noting the restoration work already completed on several storefronts. The Henderson building's ornate cornices had been carefully repaired, its brick facade cleaned and repointed with historically accurate materials. Millwright's Corner, once threaded with worrying cracks from foundation shifting, now stood solid, its structural issues addressed while maintaining its 1890s character. Rebecca Anderson, just the person I was hoping to find. I turned to see Martin Clark hurrying toward me, architectural plans clutched in his hand. Martin owned Clark's fine furniture, housed in a converted carriage house that had belonged to his family for generations. His commitment to traditional craftsmanship made him a natural ally in preservation efforts, though he rarely involved himself in formal society activities. "Morning, Martin. How's the restoration coming along?" I gestured toward his shop, where scaffolding still obscured part of the facade. "That's what I wanted to discuss." He unfolded the plans on a nearby bench. The drainage work revealed something unexpected behind the east wall. My grandfather always claimed there was an original delivery entrance that had been covered over sometime in the 1930s, but no one believed him. I examined the architectural drawings, immediately recognizing the significance of what he was showing me. "This is an intact arched doorway. The proportions match other carriage entrances from that period." "Exactly." Martin's enthusiasm was infectious. "But here's my dilemma. The current restoration plan simply reinforces the existing wall. I'd like to modify the approach to excavate and restore the original entrance, but the additional cost is substantial. This would significantly enhance the historical accuracy of the building," I agreed, studying the drawings more carefully. "Have you approached the Preservation Society about supplemental funding?" Martin's expression turned sheepish. "Eleanor suggested I speak with you directly. Apparently, the Foundation has a provision for discovery-based preservation opportunities. That might apply here." I smiled at Eleanor's characteristic directness in sending Martin my way. The provision he mentioned had been my addition to the Foundation's charter, designed specifically for situations where restoration work revealed previously unknown historical elements worth preserving. "She's correct," This is exactly the type of project that provision was created for. Let's set up a formal review, but I can tell you now this looks promising. As we discussed next steps, I noticed Vanessa exiting the bank across the street. Seeing us, she crossed over, elegant in a tailored camel coat that complemented the autumn colors surrounding us. "Martin, Rebecca." She greeted us with professional warmth. "Discussing more preservation matters?" Martin quickly explained his discovery, spreading the plans for Vanessa's inspection. To my continual surprise, my sister examined the architectural details with genuine interest, rather than the perfunctory attention she would have shown months earlier. The symmetry of the original design would be significantly enhanced by restoring this entrance, she noted, tracing the arched doorway with her finger. "Have you considered the potential business advantages as well? A separate entrance could allow you to expand your showroom concept without altering the main customer flow." Martin blinked, clearly not having considered this angle. "That's actually brilliant. I've been wanting to create a dedicated space for commission consultations. The foundation could support the historical restoration aspects," I suggested, building on Vanessa's observation. "While any modern adaptations for business purposes would fall under separate funding." Vanessa nodded. "A perfect application of our balanced approach, preserving historical elements while enhancing their practical utility for current needs." As Martin departed with renewed enthusiasm and clear direction, Vanessa and I continued walking toward the Anderson home for our weekly meeting with Father's doctors. The easy collaboration we had just demonstrated still occasionally surprised me. How naturally we now extended each other's ideas rather than opposing them. "You noticed the business potential immediately," I observed. "Something I would have overlooked." She smiled slightly. "And you recognize the historical significance that justified foundation involvement. We've become quite complementary." The observation was delivered matter-of-factly, but represented a profound evolution in Vanessa's thinking. The sister, who had once viewed my preservation interests as impractical sentimentality, now acknowledged their value alongside her business pragmatism. Our arrival at the Anderson home coincided with Father's return from physical therapy. His mobility had improved considerably over recent months. He now used a walker for short distances, though the wheelchair remained necessary for longer periods. More remarkably, his speech had progressed from isolated words to simple sentences, allowing more complex communication than we had initially hoped possible. "My girls," he greeted us as Helen helped him transfer from the transport van to his wheelchair. "Good walk?" "Very productive," I confirmed. Martin Clark discovered an original carriage entrance that the foundation may help restore. "And I've just come from finalizing the Henderson building refinancing," Vanessa added. "The improved infrastructure increased the property valuation by 12%. Father nodded with evident satisfaction. "Working together." "Good." The simple approval conveyed volumes. Throughout our childhood and early adulthood, Father's acknowledgement had been parceled out sparingly, weighted heavily toward business accomplishments. Now he offered equal recognition for preservation achievements and financial successes, validating the balanced approach we were developing. Inside, Dr. Mercer awaited us in the garden room, which had become the preferred location for Father's medical consultations. The neurologist's expression was notably positive as we entered. "Richard has shown remarkable progress this month," she began after preliminary greetings. "The latest cognitive assessments indicate significant improvement in both expressive and receptive language functions. We've noticed his sentences becoming more complex," Vanessa confirmed. "What's driving the improvement?" I asked. "Is it simply time and continued therapy, or something specific?" Dr. Mercer glanced at Father, who nodded permission for her to continue. "There appear to be multiple factors, but one significant element seems to be his renewed engagement with architectural design. The creative activity is stimulating neural pathways in ways that standard therapeutic exercises alone cannot achieve. She gestured toward the drafting table we had set up near the windows, a modified version that accommodated Father's limited mobility while allowing him to pursue the design work that had once been central to his identity. The combination of cognitive challenge, creative expression, and purposeful activity creates ideal conditions for neural recovery, Dr. Mercer continued. Has Richard shared his current project with you? Vanessa and I exchanged glances, both shaking our heads. Father had been working on something for several weeks but had been uncharacteristically secretive about its nature. Perhaps now is a good time, Dr. Mercer suggested, wheeling Father toward the drafting table where several large drawings lay covered with protective paper. With deliberate movements, Father removed the covering to reveal detailed architectural plans. I immediately recognized the Anderson home's floor plan, but extensively modified with additions and adaptations I hadn't seen before. What is this? Dad? Vanessa asked, leaning closer to examine the intricate drawings. Father's expression held a depth of purpose I hadn't seen since before his stroke. Anderson. Heritage. Center, he stated carefully, each word precisely formed. The plans revealed a thoughtfully conceived transformation, not destruction of our family home, but evolution of its purpose. The main structure remained intact, its historical character preserved, while discrete additions extended from the rear in complementary architectural styles. Labels indicated museum spaces, educational areas, and community rooms. You want to turn the house into a heritage center? I asked, trying to process this unexpected vision. Father nodded, then pointed to a specific notation in his distinctive architectural handwriting, family residence maintained, West Wing. We would still live here, I interpreted, but share the rest with the community? Family legacy, public benefit, Father affirmed, clearly pleased that we understood his intention. Vanessa studied the financial projections Father had included, alongside the architectural designs, typically thorough even with his limited communication abilities. This could be structured as a non-profit extension of the foundation, she observed, her analytical mind immediately identifying practical implementation paths. The tax advantages would be significant, and operational costs could be offset through educational grants and community partnership funding. What struck me most powerfully was how Father's design honored both our perspectives, preserving the historical integrity that mattered deeply to me, while creating practical utility and community value that aligned with Vanessa's business sensibilities. It wasn't compromise but synthesis, each priority enhanced rather than diminished by its integration with the other. When did you start developing this? I asked, noting the extensive detail that suggested long consideration. Father's response surprised both of us. Before? Stroke. Years. You've been planning this for years? Vanessa's tone conveyed the same astonishment I felt. Why didn't you ever mention it? Father's expression turned reflective, a hint of regret passing through his eyes. Waiting. For you. Together. The simple explanation carried profound implications. Father had envisioned this transformation of our family home into a broader community resource long before his health crisis, but had waited to propose it until his daughters could approach it collaboratively rather than adversarially. He had recognized that such a project required both our strengths, my dedication to historical integrity and Vanessa's business acumen, to succeed. Had the hidden property deed and subsequent confrontation never occurred, had we continued in our separate spheres with minimal interaction, this vision might have remained unrealized, not because it lacked merit, but because we lacked the unified perspective necessary to implement it properly. The timing is actually perfect, I noted, examining how the Heritage Center concept aligned with our recently established foundation. This could become the physical embodiment of the preservation values we've been promoting through the Foundation's work downtown. Vanessa nodded, her practical mind already calculating next steps. The zoning would require modification, but with the property's historical significance and the educational component, approval should be achievable. We'd need to develop a phased implementation plan to minimize disruption to Dad's recovery environment. As we discussed preliminary considerations, I observed Dr. Mercer watching Father with professional satisfaction. The project clearly provided exactly the purposeful engagement her earlier comments had identified as beneficial for neural recovery. Complex problem-solving combined with meaningful connection to his life's work and values. When the doctor departed after completing her assessment, the three of us remained in the garden room, continuing to explore Father's vision. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the architectural plans that represented not just a transformation of our family home, but a transformation of our understanding of family legacy itself. This would be a significant undertaking, Vanessa acknowledged, ever the pragmatist. The financial investment alone would be substantial, not to mention the regulatory hurdles and operational considerations. But think of what it would mean for Westlake, I countered, envisioning the educational impact. A living museum of architectural history, preservation techniques, sustainable adaptation of historic structures. It could become a resource for the entire region. Father watched our exchange with evident pleasure, his expression more animated than I had seen since before his stroke. This was what he had been waiting for. His daughters engaged in constructive collaboration rather than competitive positioning, each contributing distinct strengths toward a shared vision. Begin. Small, he suggested, pointing to a notation indicating potential project phases. Grow. Over time. The wisdom of this approach was immediately apparent. Rather than attempting immediate full implementation, we could evolve the concept gradually, opening portions of the home for limited educational programming, while refining the broader vision based on community response and practical experience. The carriage house could be converted first, I suggested, referring to the detached structure that currently served primarily for storage. It's architecturally significant but underutilized, and modifying it wouldn't disrupt the main residence. Vanessa nodded, building on the suggestion. We could use it to test operational models before committing to larger-scale implementation. A pilot program would provide valuable data for grant applications and community partnerships. As we continued developing the concept, I was struck by how naturally we had fallen into complementary roles. My focus on historical and educational elements, Vanessa's on financial and operational considerations, neither perspective dominating, but both essential to creating a viable plan. This was what Father had seen potential for all along, the unique alchemy that could emerge when his daughter's different strengths combined toward a common purpose. The hidden property deed that had initially appeared to divide assets between us had ultimately served as the catalyst for something far more valuable. The recognition that our differences were not obstacles to overcome, but complementary resources to integrate. The Anderson home had never been merely a physical asset to preserve or develop, but a tangible symbol of our family's evolving legacy. A legacy that now included not just what we inherited, but what we chose to create together for the benefit of the broader community. As evening approached and Father showed signs of fatigue, we carefully covered the drawings and helped him prepare for dinner. Before leaving the garden room, he reached for both our hands, holding them together in his partially recovered grip. Proud, he said simply, the single word carrying the weight of years of complicated family dynamics now moving toward resolution. Both. Different. Both needed. In that moment, I understood that the true restoration taking place in the Anderson family extended far beyond buildings and infrastructure. We were restoring relationships, perspectives, and possibilities that had been obscured by years of misunderstanding and competition. Like the hidden carriage entrance in Martin's building, valuable connections had been covered over but never truly lost. waiting to be rediscovered when conditions allowed. The process wouldn't be simple or swift. Meaningful restoration never is. But the foundation had been established, structural supports were being carefully positioned, and the vision of what could be restored now guided each step forward. The hidden property deed had changed everything, not by dividing an inheritance, but by revealing an unexpected path to shared purpose and mutual appreciation, perhaps the most valuable legacy any family could hope to preserve. Spring arrived. In Westlake, with a burst of renewal that seemed to mirror the transformations taking place within the Anderson family. Construction had begun on the carriage house conversion, our pilot project for the Heritage Center concept, and Father's recovery continued to exceed medical expectations. His speech, while still measured, had progressed to near-complete sentences, and he now participated actively in the weekly foundation meetings we held in the garden room. On a particularly beautiful April morning, I was supervising the careful removal of deteriorated siding from the carriage house when the contractor, Miles Hargrove, called me over with unusual urgency. "Ms. Anderson, you need to see this," he said, pointing to an area they had just exposed beneath the weather-worn exterior boards. I approached, expecting perhaps evidence of termite damage or structural issues requiring additional repairs. Instead, I found myself staring at a small compartment built into the wall framing, a hidden space approximately 12 inches square, sealed with a miniature wooden door that blended nearly invisibly with the surrounding structure when closed. "I've renovated dozens of historic buildings," Miles remarked, "but I've never seen anything quite like this. It looks purpose-built as a hiding place." My mind immediately went to the Prohibition era, when many homes in Westlake had incorporated discrete storage spaces for illicit alcohol. The carriage house dates to the 1890s, but it could have been modified during the 1920s, I suggested, examining the craftsmanship of the hidden compartment. "That's what I thought too," Miles agreed. "But take a look inside before we continue. There might be historical artifacts worth documenting before we proceed." With careful movements, I opened the small door. The compartment contained a metal box, tarnished with age but intact, approximately the size of a hardcover book. No lock secured it, just a simple latch darkened by decades of oxidation. "Should I continue with the scheduled work, or would you prefer to examine this further before we proceed?" Miles asked, demonstrating the sensitivity to historical discovery that had made him our preferred contractor for preservation projects. "Let's pause here until I can properly document and evaluate whatever this contains," I decided. "The construction schedule can accommodate a short delay." Miles nodded, instructing his crew to secure the site and redirect their efforts to the roof repairs that formed another part of the day's planned work. As they dispersed, I carefully removed the metal box from its hiding place, surprised by its substantial weight. Rather than opening it immediately, I called Vanessa, who was meeting with potential educational partners for the Heritage Center at her downtown office. "Can you come to the carriage house? We've discovered something that might be significant," I explained, describing the hidden compartment and metal box. "I'll reschedule my next appointment," she replied without hesitation. Another small but meaningful indication of how our priorities had realigned. 6 months earlier, she would have delegated any historical curiosity to my attention while maintaining her business schedule. While waiting for Vanessa's arrival, I photographed the compartment in detail, noting its construction and placement within the wall. The craftsmanship suggested it was original to the carriage house rather than a later addition. The joinery matched other structural elements we had documented during initial assessments. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later, trading her usual business attire for the more practical outfit she now kept at the house for site visits. Dark jeans, a quality sweater, and boots that could navigate construction areas while still looking professional. "So, what have we found?" she asked, examining the compartment with interest. I showed her the metal box, still unopened. I wanted us to discover the contents together. Given everything that's happened with the property deed and Father's hidden Documentation. It seemed appropriate. She nodded, appreciating the gesture. Let's take it to the garden room. Better light there, and Father might want to be included if it's something significant to family history. The thoughtfulness of this suggestion, considering Father's interest and inclusion, reflected another evolution in Vanessa's approach. Once focused exclusively on efficient outcomes, she now regularly incorporated considerations of family connection and shared experience into her decision-making. Father was working with his speech therapist when we entered the main house, but upon seeing the metal box and our expectant expressions, he immediately gestured for the session to conclude early. Found something? He asked, his curiosity evident. A hidden compartment in the carriage house wall, I explained, placing the box on the table between us. With this inside. Never. Seen before, Father confirmed, studying the box. With interest. Open. With careful movements, I released the tarnished latch and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in deteriorating fabric that might once have been velvet, lay several objects. A small leather-bound book, a collection of daguerreotypes in protective cases, several handwritten letters tied with faded ribbon, and, most surprisingly, a velvet pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins or jewelry when moved. Family artifacts, Vanessa observed, her tone holding unexpected reverence. From the look of those daguerreotypes, mid-19th century, well before the main house was constructed. I carefully removed the leather-bound book first, opening it to reveal handwritten entries in faded but legible ink. The first page bore an inscription. Journal of Thomas Anderson, commenced January 1856, Westlake Settlement. Great-great-grandfather, Father identified immediately, his expression brightening with recognition. Founded, lumber mill. The Anderson family's connection to Westlake had begun with Thomas, who had established the region's first commercial sawmill along the river that defined the town's eastern boundary. Family legend held that he had arrived with little more than determination and carpentry skills, building the enterprise that would eventually evolve into Anderson real estate under later generations. I turned the pages carefully, scanning entries that documented daily life in the frontier settlement, business transactions, weather observations, personal reflections. Then a particular passage caught my attention. April 18, 1856, completed purchase of the hillside parcel from Jacobson. Today, 20 acres including the limestone outcropping. Sarah believes me reckless for committing our limited capital to land we cannot immediately develop. But I maintain my conviction that this elevated ground will one day be most desirable for residences as the settlement expands. The river bottomlands serve our commercial purposes well, but a family should dwell where fresh air and pleasant prospects prevail. The original land purchase, I realized aloud, the parcel where our house now stands. Vanessa had been examining the daguerreotypes while I read, carefully opening the protective cases to reveal portraits of stern-faced pioneers, our ancestors captured in the early days of photography. Look at this, she said, handing me one particular image. Unlike the formal portraits, this daguerreotype showed a crude cabin on cleared land, a bearded man and woman in simple clothing standing proudly before it. I believe that's the original Anderson homestead before any substantial structures were built. Father leaned forward in his wheelchair, studying the image with evident emotion. Beginning, everything, he said softly. From this to now. The significance of this discovery was settling over us all. Tangible connections to the very origins of our family's presence in Westlake. Not the polished narrative of success that had been passed down through generations, but the raw, uncertain beginnings from which everything else had grown. I returned to the journal, scanning further entries that documented Thomas's efforts to establish himself in the growing settlement, challenges with lumber suppliers, negotiations with merchants, occasional conflicts with other settlers over resources or boundaries. The portrait that emerged was more complex than the visionary entrepreneur of family lore. This Thomas Anderson experienced failures, uncertainties, and periodic self-doubt alongside his eventual successes. A particular entry from winter 1857 struck me with its candid vulnerability. February 3, 1857, another setback with the mill wheel mechanism, requiring parts that must be ordered from Pittsburgh at considerable expense. Sarah suggested selling the hillside parcel to cover costs, a practical solution I cannot fault her for proposing. Yet something prevents me from surrendering that land. Not mere stubbornness, but a vision of what it might become that I cannot fully articulate even to myself. There is value in holding fast to long possibilities even amid pressing concerns. I must believe this conviction will eventually prove wiser than immediate expediency. He almost sold the land where our house now stands, I noted, sharing the entry with Vanessa and Father. Financial pressures nearly changed the entire course of our family history. But he held on to the vision despite practical challenges, Vanessa observed, the parallel to our recent family journey unmistakable. Long-term vision over immediate expediency. Father nodded, his expression thoughtful. Balance, always the challenge. I turned my attention to the letters bound with faded ribbon, carefully untying the simple knot that had secured them for perhaps a century or more. The correspondence was primarily between Thomas and his wife Sarah during periods when business took him to Pittsburgh or Chicago, practical communications about family matters, business concerns, and community developments. One letter from Sarah, dated summer 1858, contained a passage that caught my attention. The children and I walked to the hillside parcel yesterday afternoon to escape the river valley heat. We picnicked beneath the old oak that stands near the limestone outcropping, and I must confess that the beauty of the view caused me to reconsider my practical objections to your purchase. As we looked out over the settlement, watching it spread below us like a living map, I could begin to glimpse what you have seen all along. Not merely land, but possibility. Not simply acreage, but legacy. Perhaps there is wisdom in preserving certain things beyond immediate utility, in maintaining spaces that future generations might fill with purpose we cannot yet imagine. I read the passage aloud, moved by this evidence that the tension between practical utility and preservation of possibility had existed in our family from its very beginnings. What appeared to be a modern conflict between Vanessa's business focus and my preservation interests was in fact an echo of dynamics that had shaped Anderson family decisions for generations. Sarah came to appreciate the land's long-term value, Vanessa noted, even though it defied immediate practical justification. And Thomas recognized practical necessities while maintaining his longer vision, I added. Neither perspective was complete without the other. Father smiled, more fully than I had seen since his stroke. Family pattern, he observed. Always. Both sides. Needed. Finally, we turned our attention to the velvet pouch. I loosened its drawstring and carefully emptied the contents onto the table's surface. Rather than coins or jewelry as I had expected, it contained a collection of unusual items, several rough-cut stones that appeared to be unpolished gemstones, a small gold nugget, a carved wooden token, and most curiously, a tarnished silver pocket watch. Father reached for the watch immediately, his rehabilitation-strengthened fingers carefully opening its case to reveal the face within. The timepiece was ornate but worn, its hands frozen at 3:47, the crystal scratched from decades or perhaps centuries of use before being consigned to the hidden compartment. Anderson. Heirloom. Father identified with certainty. Family. Stories mentioned. Lost. The watch bore an engraving inside its case. To Thomas Anderson, may time reveal what wisdom cannot foresee. S.A. 1860. A gift from Sarah, Vanessa interpreted. The initials match. The inscription struck me as profoundly appropriate to our current circumstances. Time had indeed revealed possibilities that neither father's business wisdom nor my preservation knowledge could have foreseen independently. The hidden property deed that initially appeared to divide us had ultimately revealed a path toward integration of both perspectives. As we carefully documented each item from the box, creating an inventory for potential inclusion in the Heritage Center's inaugural exhibition, I reflected on the timing of this discovery. Had we found these artifacts a year earlier, when property rights and development plans divided us, we might have viewed them through separate, competing lenses. Vanessa assessing potential market value, me focusing on historical significance, each perspective isolated from the other. Instead, we now examined this unexpected family treasure with shared appreciation for both its practical and heritage value. Its potential contribution to the Heritage Center concept, reflecting both business possibilities and preservation priorities, the evolution in our approach was as significant as the discovery itself. This changes the Heritage Center narrative, Vanessa noted thoughtfully. We can trace the Anderson family's connection to Westlake from these frontier beginnings through each generation's contributions to community development. A tangible demonstration of how preserving the past creates foundation for future growth. I agreed, seeing how perfectly these artifacts supported our emerging vision. Father, who had been examining the journal with evident emotion, looked up at his daughters with an expression of deep satisfaction. Family complete. Circle, he observed. Thomas. Sarah, balanced, like you two. The observation held profound truth. What we had initially perceived as a modern conflict between business priorities and preservation values was in fact a continuation of complementary perspectives that had shaped our family from its very beginning. Thomas's vision and Sarah's practicality, Father's business acumen and my preservation focus, Vanessa's strategic thinking and my historical awareness, each generation balancing immediate utility with longer legacy in its own way. The hidden compartment had revealed not just artifacts but insight, confirmation that the integration Vanessa and I were now achieving wasn't a departure from Anderson family tradition, but its fullest expression. The tension between preservation and progress, between honoring heritage and creating new value, had always been present. The wisdom lay not in resolving this tension by choosing one priority over the other, but in maintaining both in productive balance. As we carefully returned the items to their protective box, now destined for professional conservation before becoming centerpieces of the Heritage Center's founding exhibition, I felt a deepened sense of purpose in our collaborative work. The Heritage Center would not simply preserve Anderson family history, it would embody the essential Anderson family dynamic, the creative tension between honoring what came before and creating what might come next. The hidden property deed that had initially threatened to divide our family had instead revealed a path toward its most authentic expression, not through elimination of differences, but through their thoughtful integration. Thomas and Sarah Anderson had begun this journey on the hillside parcel where our family home now stood. Vanessa and I were continuing it through choices they could never have imagined, but would likely have understood completely. Legacy, I realized, was not what you left behind, but what you set in motion. Possibilities preserved for future generations, to develop in ways you could not foresee. Time indeed revealed what wisdom alone could not imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.